Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they absolutely got it right. And this is Tom Navolis, your host. And I'm so delighted to be with you here in 2019. Can you imagine that? We're already in 2019. It just seems like, time goes by like crazy. And I think just on that note, that's something that I mentioned in last week's wrap and program for 2018 is that, folks, we're living our eternity now. So, you may call it Groundhog Day for some of you, and you think that things are just going over and over and over again and all of that. But in reality, we're living each and every day. We're given the privilege of waking up in this world, but yet there's another world to come. But I wanted to start this week, this new year, with thanking everyone that has watched the program, watches the program on YouTube as well, and that I'm just delighted that you're here to look into the mirrors of history and understand that, as I mentioned, there's no new words spoken. There's no new ideas that are really there. It's just how we're expressing ideas that have already gone through the circle of time and in how it is relative to us at this very moment. Something I wanted to bring out by a very interesting person. This is a quote out of many of his writings. It's very simple, very, very simple. Beware lest anyone cheat you through philosophy and empty deceit. Wow. That we're seeing that all over the place. And simply, that's out of from St. Paul, and as we call him St. Paul, or Paul the Apostle, in Colossians 2, in the middle of verses 6 through 9. So beware, lest anyone cheat you through philosophy and empty deceit. That's pretty much what we're going to see this year from the House of Representatives, is that we have a vain philosophy, we have false philosophy, we have evil philosophy that, even with the, as I always talk, the Republicans, the those that are the globalists and all of that, there's this great separation. And we are going to really watch the unfolding at that national level. But what I really want to focus on this year as we look into those mirrors of history is not only the national components, because, the fact is, the reality is, our educational system has no longer taken us into those opportunities to understand how this nation was designed to function. And that's why I do this program, with Sam Adams and definitely the Anti-Federalists, which we're going to get to something with the Anti-Federalists that are going to talk about two areas that are kind of pressing right now, but they're kind of the baselines of what's going on: money, power, deceit, deception, and thought process. How does one get, or philosophy, how does one get from one point to the other? But what I think that 2019 needs also to be, and we need to come back to that reality. Everybody is focused, 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 and a lot of what you hear on this programming, and I'm at Liberty Works Radio Network, and that with this programming on Liberty Works Radio Network, as well as you see in the media, the majority of it is focused on national, 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 national. Everything about, what's happening in Washington, D.C. is now the center of the universe. Well, we're going to go back and we're going to look, not today, but, through the course of this year, is that the center of the universe is not Washington, D.C. The center of the universe, according to the proper functions of our republic, is your hometown, your family. your county, and even if you want to take it out that far, your state. That's the center of the universe. And that's exactly what Sam Adams always said. He said, all politics is local. It's local. And many times people get so tied up in the media, in what's going on in the national news, and I don't care which of the um, bobbleheads out there that you put on. All the national news is driven by the emotionalism and all that the Anti-federalists talked about. All that they said was the potentials that are out there for taking and manipulating the people. But where emotionalism drives hard and where people have given up their uh, thought process is what's going on locally. So I am calling today's program the Concession to Consolidation. Concession to Consolidation because by virtue of all the attention that is being given to the national government, we see that the Anti-federalists were absolutely correct in saying that what would occur under the Constitution of 87 is a consolidation of the states into the national. Now, we haven't seen the states consolidate in that they are just, or obviously not part of a federal government total insanity, but at the same time, they are. They are. And what do I mean by that? I mean that we have so much that has gone on based on what's happened under the forms of taxation, what's happened under the forms of legislation, what's happened under the forms of international treaties, executive agreements. Yes, and I am going to plug the book pretty heavy this year because I think we need to get back into understanding what is covenant and what does that mean for we as a people and what has happened within the whole essence of how our government is supposed to function. And as the Anti-federalists did predict, is that when Congress had the absolute power to tax in the manner that they have, and that many different departments would become established as they have become, then the only thing that happens next is that they now start to subsume what goes on in the states by the way that money is used to bribe the people within the states, and to the extent that the state governments must take and comply with certain federal regulations, laws to some extent, but mostly from regulations. When we look and we hear about being overregulated, uh, absolutely without question. We're overregulated because of all the various departments that have come into existence whereby the people, we the people, have conceded our rightful place and power to those that are sitting, in some cases, 3,000 miles away. In my case, it's about, what, 8 hours away to Washington, D.C. So if you do the math, 60 miles an hour, 65, 70 miles an hour. Yeah, I don't know. You pick it times 8. That's what, 400 miles at best. So these are the types of things that have happened. Instead of looking at representation and the limitations of government, which we will be hearing from the federal farmer here shortly in some respects, to what those limitations should be, what proper representation should be. Obviously, we're not going to cover it all. It comes back down to what's happening in local government. And in local government, I know that myself and that many of you are looking at and don't know. Are looking at, there's many of us that are looking at, but you don't know. You don't know that in your area, you're going to have a bunch of taxation coming at you again, probably around May, I would think, when a election cycle usually bubbles up, and then maybe again in August when there's another special election or whatever. And these things are called levies. You're going to see levies for schools. You're going to see levies for this. You're going to see levies for roads. You're going to see levies for fire and police and all sorts of different things. Levies, ladies and gentlemen, as I've talked about and I will continue to talk about from that local basis, are self inflicted eviction. Self inflicted eviction. That means that if you do not understand the absolute depth of what is going on with that taxing entity, that you will be taxed out of your property. We could take that down all sorts of paths, but the important aspect is that you clearly understand that this is what's upon you. And that local taxation affects you very, very directly in that it affects your property tax. So that's why I say self inflicted eviction. Because if you cannot pay and you can no longer afford your property taxes, you may sell your house. Not that you're going to be physically evicted for, non-payment. In some cases, that'll be true. But in other cases, it's a matter of sitting there going, man, I can't live here any longer. And I'm hearing that over and over and over again. So, what is the purpose of government? I think that's something that we need to review, we need to get into, not only from that national level, but what does it mean within all government is local, that which Samuel Adams always brought to bear. What does it mean that your townships, your cities, your counties, how are they functioning? What are they doing? What are the expectations of you, the citizen? And then how much of that has been given over and is becoming a part of and owned by the federal government? I can tell you that there is a thing called Agenda 2030. There is a thing called sustainable communities, and that has far-reaching implications. And it's not a conspiracy insanity. What it is a conspiracy, meaning it's a well thought out plan that's being implemented by those that have that philosophical or ideological perspective on what your community is supposed to look like. The city used to be a town that I grew up in. My father still lives there. Just what is going on by virtue of the city planner and what the mayor thinks and what they think that the people want. Very interesting conversations. And these are very important components because then it looks at what is being pushed into your community based on rules and regulations that one and the all will capitulate into, that have far reaching circumstances, far reaching impact upon one's liberty, upon one's pocketbook, upon one's ability to transit, to do as one would expect to do under the liberties that this nation guarantees. So we have a lot to talk about in 2019. There's so many different directions that we obviously can go. The two places that I'd like to take it today, and we'll see, and give me some input back, if you will, is that we're looking at what is happening local based on how we are being pressed and exactly what the Anti-federalists talked about, how the federal government under the Constitution of 87, if we do not have moral and virtuous leaders, will reach down, as Brutus says, will reach down, ladies, into your bathrooms, will reach down, gentlemen, into your wine cellars, will reach down into every aspect of your life. And that's what we're going to talk about, because then that means what happens locally. What does it mean then that the local governments will take and submit to the national authority, and you're done? So come on back for the next segment of Samuel Adams Returns, those Anti-federalists, they did. They absolutely got it right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this second segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they absolutely got it right. And I do want to thank the folks here at Liberty Works Radio Network, primarily where I am hosted at. And I want to once again start this year with giving them a big thank you and to give them a plug that they absolutely need all the time. It's a listener-funded network. And I definitely would ask that you take the time to go and look at all the different programming that's there. What I like about it, this isn't a bunch of the bobbleheads that are in the national news and all of that. So I think this is a nice place to be and get some really good information in the various local markets, as well as some other programming that causes you to think, stretches your imagination, stretches even your faith, and causes you to go do your homework, whether that is to read your Bible, read your Constitution, read the Anti-Federalist papers, read the Federalist papers, and study. And once again, I will, as always, I will reference and have referenced every program every which way that I possibly could. This is I was thinking about it the other day before we get into it, but just kind of an interesting thing that I was thinking about the way that I do my program relative to another number of other people out there. And, uh, I'm still waiting for that PhD or that LD to be sitting over here on this blank wall, which most likely will never happen. But I looked at that and I started looking at the requirements for some programs and PhD programs. And I sat there and I started thinking about it, and I'm going, well, when you do that final thesis, that book, well, I got two books and that are highly documented. Okay. And then I got thinking about it and going, for a pilot high and deep, and for those that don't understand, that's a PhD. That's what PhDs really are. You're paying a lot of money to have, and this is why I never get a PhD. This is because Kathy's looking at me and laughing over there, and from the control area, is that when you're seeking a pilot high and deep, unless you're doing it in science, unless you're doing it in real science, real mathematics, you're not breaking through on anything. If you're doing just a pilot high and deep in psychobabble or even history or any of these other things that people count as intellectual enlightenment, what happens in that regard is that you're looking at somebody else's stuff because you're not going to create anything new. So I thought about this, is that if one takes, and if a PhD review board was honest and wasn't looking for a whole lot of money to pad their pockets, and also that a lot of the people on PhD boards, what they do is they're looking at sucking that information out of the candidates as they promote the candidates. Well, all the references that are in every one of my programs are the content, opportunities, and review with my words, instead of being typed, are spoken, that would go into such a program. So I thought that was fun. I know it's way off track, but just think about that, is that we have the likes of every administration, all the think tanks out there that in reality, folks, are no different than you. You're the brainiacs. I think Trump always nails it correctly. You, as a gathering of citizens, has greater intellectual power, has greater understanding of the issues than any of all these think tanks, with all these intellectuals sitting there with their pilot high and deeps. So, congratulations to all of you that read and research. I from the University of Samuel Adams grant you your pilot high and deep. So go out and have some really great conversations because you can lay it on no different than anybody else out there. So with that, we're going to have some kind of fun. We got to have that fun as well with this program. And now we're going to get here into the federal farmer. And this was in a period of somewhere around October 8th or 9th in 1787. And the federal farmer, it's kind of, once again, historically not sure whether it was Melancton Smith or whether it was someone else, but a lot of people are thinking, based on the tone, based on the background, that is more like Melancton Smith. And these articles were published throughout New York at first, and then they went all over then the 13 states. So one of the couple of things that I wanted to hit on that are very, very timely, not only from the perspective of local political endeavors, but in addition to that, what we're going to see and observe and have seen and observed within the context of Congress itself. So once again, we hear in a generalized format a tone and idea that Nancy Pelosi thinks that she has equal power to the president, whereas Congress is not even in equal power, but therefore checks and balances on the presidency, whereas the presidency is checks and balances on Congress and the judiciary. So it's not equal power. Some use that term equal powers. It's the ability of checks and balances. There's different powers, different reasons. And this again goes to the understanding of how the function of government is supposed to work. But with that, here we have is that the federal farmer in his writing is to have the idea of government before us and to show that a consolidated one is the object in view. It is necessary not only to examine the plan, but also its history and the politics of its particular friends. So when I look at the concession to the consolidation, the idea is that that's what they were talking about. That at some point in time, the potentials for the federal government to subsume everything else, all the way down to your bathrooms, your beer gardens, your beer making, your wine, your hairbrush, toothbrush, your water, your toilets, all of that was talked about by the Anti-federalists. So the Confederation, meaning the Articles of Confederation, was formed when great confidence was placed in the voluntary exertions of individuals and of the respective states and the farmers of it to guard, and the framers of it to guard against usurpation, so limited and checked the powers that, in many respects, they are inadequate to the existence of the Union. We find, therefore, members of Congress urging alterations in the federal system almost as soon as it was adopted. And you have to remember that I have a real passion about the Articles of Confederation because my passion around Samuel Adams. And Samuel Adams was on that committee that drafted those Articles of Confederation. So Sam Adams has a lot to say about then, and that's why he was against this Constitution of 87 in relationship to all of those things that could be potential evils within it. We're going to skip around here, and he said that during the war, the general confusion and introduction of paper money infused in the minds of people vague ideas respecting government and credit. We expected too much from the return of peace, and of course, we have been disappointed. People are disappointed in many different things. And when you look at what happens on the functions of government, and when you go through a major event, you sit there and you go, well, what just happened? Wait a minute, we did what we wanted to do. We wanted to have peace, but why is there a disappointment in that? And that goes to what I talked about last week as well. You have, and more so, that people are crying peace, peace, but there is no peace. The only peace that you're ever going to get is peace in Christ. And then you have to take and deal with that from the extensibility of the gospel into the reality of the world. Now, he was talking about here what happens with the legislatures and the degree of changes that the several orders of men in the community have been prepared by degrees for, and they don't mean college degrees, but by levels of thought processes and philosophy for a change of government. And this very abuse of power in the legislatures, which in some cases has been charged upon the Democratic Party of the community, meaning the people, has furnished aristocratical men with those very weapons, that those very means with which, in great measure, they are rapidly affecting their favorite object, and proposed a change posterity may reproach not only a few overbearing, unprincipled men, but those parties in the states which have misused their powers. So, misuse of power, artful men, those that would be unprincipled, are nothing new under the sun. I always talk about that from Ecclesiastes 1:9. And when you're looking at that, what's happening is that we see that in every course of time, even when you're trying to build a principled form of government without moral leadership, and talked about very much with the Anti-federalists in particular, and without virtue being a part of the people, morality and virtue being a part of the people, as well as those then, because if you have a moral and virtuous people, you're going to elect from your moral and virtuous people, you're going to elect moral and virtuous leaders. Well, Anti-federalists, and in particular, our friend the federal farmer was saying right off the bat, you know what, you got unscrupulous people that are there. They're already, they've done stuff even during the war. And now that we've come out of the war itself and we're forming in these governments, you know what, things have happened. The states have done very well. We haven't had time to take and make sure that these processes and these systems that we're putting into place are actually functioning in a manner that is going to work. So why hurry up and change everything at that national level? Why change everything? It was kind of like being duped when the Convention of '87 came about. And what I mean by that is what we have here. And I think Kathy's getting ready to show me. We got about 2 minutes left. So what we're going to come back with here in the next couple of minutes is that there was the conduct of several legislatures touching paper money and tender laws has prepared many honest men for change in government, which otherwise they would not have thought of, when by the evils on the one hand and by the secret instigations of artful men on the other, the minds of men were become sufficiently uneasy, a bold step was taken, which is usually followed by a revolution or a civil war. A general convention for mere commercial purposes was moved for. The authors of this measure saw the people's attention turned solely to amendments of the federal system, and the federal system being that the Articles of Confederation, and that the idea of a total change had been stated. Probably no state would have appointed members to the convention. So what he's saying here is that the people of the various states were duped. So beware, as Paul says in Colossians, beware of anyone that would cheat you through philosophy and empty deceit. So what we're going to talk about a little bit more is that how did we go that paper money was taking and giving a blindness over the ideas of men to the extent that they were going to look at and be ready for changes in government. And how is it that then when we were looking at making amendments to the Articles of Confederation, next thing we know, we're seeing a whole new form of government that can potentially lead to consolidation and obviate the states all the way down to your toothbrush, your hairbrush, your water, and your toilets. So come on back when Sam Adams returns and those Anti-Federalists, they got it right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns Those Anti-Federalists. They absolutely, unequivocally got it 100% correct. You thought I was going to say right. I know. You got the line down on the opening, but I had to switch it up on you a little bit. You know, this is Tom Navolis, your host. So delighted to be with you in 2019 as we're pressing into these ideas of the mirrors of history and the Anti-Federalist relationship, not only to what we're going to talk about with the federal government and what happens at the national legislature and governance, but what is most important is what Samuel Adams said about all government is local. Couple things that I just want to remind you of here at the beginning, because you know me, I'll run out of time. Even though Kathy gives me all those good time markers, I'll get going along. And as most of you know, I don't work from notes. I work from the text. I work from those documents. And so once I get on a roll, Kathy just sits there sometimes and shakes her head because we don't know where we're going. I don't know where I'm going until I get there, relative to the fundamentals of what we're talking about. And when I do my research for every program, although I have the text upon which I want to discuss, that doesn't mean that we're always going to go in any particular direction. But one of the things that I want to talk about right now is definitely promo both of the books. I think it's very, very critical and important to understand our foundational perspective going all the way back to Covenant, because as I am reading to my grandkids and go on YouTube or go to, where do you go for the archives? You go to SamuelAdamsReturns.net. SamuelAdamsReturns.net is where the archives of the program are, and you'll see a tab there as well in the menu for chaplains and clergy. And that is where I'm reading the book by 1864 is when it was published, about the chaplains and clergy of the Revolution. Very, very important, because as Mr. Headley, the one that compiled the book, says, two things. One, we must remember. And the problem is in our present age is that we don't remember any of this stuff because, number one, it's not taught. And most of the bobbleheads out there don't talk about it. Most of my peers that are very strong constitutionalists, conservatives, and even Christian Reformed folks don't talk about it. So I encourage you to look at that. I encourage you to get the book. You can download it. Go onto the website at SamuelAdamsReturns.net. You can find the link to the book there as well. The chapters are being laid out, and I am reading it to my grandchildren. And it's just an old grandpa, Papa Tom, sitting there and reading to the grandkids. So don't expect somebody in their suit with perfect language and diction, reading in a perfect manner. Not there. Not there. This is reality reading, okay? Not reality TV, but reality reading. With that, get the books. Go ahead, get the books. I think that they're important, and schedule up for the seminars. That I think the book has a lot of information in it, but those people that attend the seminar, they get the great overview on that, and it's a good book. And then the other book that's there is that not all conservatives are constitutionalists. Aren't you glad we got rid of Paul Ryan? Oh my goodness. But that doesn't mean that getting rid of Paul Ryan and Flaky Flake, that we didn't get some flakes back in there. And so I think what we got is a flaky McCain all wrapped in a, what's that guy's name? What? Mittens. Yeah, that's it. Mittens, anyway, off topic. But no, those are important topics. That's all part of it. But once again, think about it. Think about what's going to be happening to you come May. You better start looking in advance at your boards of elections, because that's where you can find out about what is going to come onto the ballot for levies. And they usually have to be there by virtue of state constitutions. Go look at your state constitution. How many people look at their state constitution? Oh my goodness. And your revised code. I'm spending hours because I'm on a board within our county, and I spend hours and hours reading the revised code relative to everything that is around that. Most of the people that sit on the boards for all these different things, they don't. But we'll talk about that some more next week, and that as we get into local politics are very, very important, because you know what? Watch out for those levies and your property. So, our friend on the federal farmer, he was talking about paper money. That's where we left off in the last segment. And that paper money can change people in such a way that they're willing to change an acceptance in governance and in how government will function. So here we have these Articles of Confederation that were working pretty darn good for the moment. They had some issues that may have started to crop up. And look, the things hadn't even been in full effect. So you didn't know how it was really going to work. But here comes along these guys thinking of some stuff. And, you know, Madison, you go and you read the history of how Madison came up with the ideas of this whole new form of government and everything, and very, very interesting. But wait a minute. The whole idea was from out of the Maryland Conference was to look at the commercial issues that were having problems between the states. And what did that mean? And so a general convention for mere commercial purposes was moved for. The authors of this measure saw that the people's attention was turned solely to the amendment of the federal system, that being, as I said, the Articles of Confederation, that had the idea of a total change been started, probably, and that had the idea of that total change, probably no state would have appointed members to the convention. The idea of destroying ultimately the state government and forming one consolidated system could not have been admitted. A convention therefore purposed. This was pleasing to the commercial towns, and the landed people had little or no concern about it. September 1786, a few men from the Middle States met at Annapolis and hastily proposed a convention in May of 1787 for the purpose generally of amending the Confederation. This was done before the delegates of Massachusetts and other states arrived. Still, not a word was said about destroying the old Constitution and making a new one. The states, still unsuspecting and not aware that they were passing the Rubicon, appointed members to the new convention for the sole and express purpose of revising the amendments of Confederation. And probably not one man in 10,000 in the United States, till within these 10 or 12 days, had an idea that the old ship was to be destroyed, and he put to the alternative of embarking in the new ship presented, or of being left in danger of sinking. The states. Wow. So the argument then goes on and continues, and there's more commentaries on the different characters of the people, what happened. But it's interesting because what he argues, and excuse me for those watching on YouTube, my nose has been itching today, is that the whole idea was that we had delegates that did not arrive in time at the Maryland Convention, but by virtue of the fact that they had consensus, by virtue they had quorum and they had consensus to move to another convention in May of the following year, it was like, oh, okay, now we got to go back and figure out about sending folks. So the things that happened there, and that I just wanted to kind of bring out as I was working on trying to put this all together again, is that what the federal farmer goes on to say is that if those 8 or so 9 men who were supposed to have been members of that convention would have shown up, or would have been there, or would have gotten there on time, they would have taken and not gone for this whole idea of a new convention and ultimately a new constitution. Would have looked at what it meant to amend it. Now, there had been strong tendencies towards the aristocracy. It became more discernible as we started looking at how this Constitution came to be. When you look at the states that met and what did it mean to be adopted or rejected by the people, and this was a very interesting concept that comes into play, is that the people obviously have the capacity, and when we see we the people, this was something that I can go back into, and I've talked about before, is that we had our young red-headed friend, I mean the real hot-fired redhead, not Jefferson, but that other young fella down there in Virginia who yelled and screamed. You can go research who I'm talking about. You'll find out. Take that for a little history lesson. Is that he said, what are you getting off saying we the people? When it was representatives from the states that went to put together and amend and then come up with this whole idea. And that was what the Articles of Confederation, when you go look at the Articles of Confederation, that's how it starts. The states of, and listing and naming the states in particular. Understandably, that I've talked about why it came out as we the people, but a unique philosophy, if you will, that comes into play, and one that leads to deceit, is that the states, by virtue of what he's talking about here in the Federal Farmer, have, and we're seeing, is the potential of being obviated by all the rules and regulations that occur at the federal level, especially when it comes to understanding how monies are drawn, and then, as we're seeing, monies are not being used. And when you have parties that are taking and not allowing for the purposes of the federal government, but are operating solely on the emotions and driving and moving emotions, one of the things that he talks about here is that it's so easy to manipulate the emotions of the people to take them down nefarious ways and purposes. So that's what we see happening. This is some of the things that the Federal Farmer brings out. And we not only see that there, but we'll see it also in your local elections when people are saying, oh, you have to vote for schools because kids need more money to get educated. Or you have to vote for this because, parks are really fun places and we need this. And you know what? We just bought at the Parks Department a whole new golf course. But you know what? We have no money to operate it. So we got to tax you so somebody else can go play golf. These are the types of things that happen both at the federal and at the local level. These are the types of things that the general populace is no longer aware of because the media doesn't cover that. It covers all the emotional and sensationalism. And even in the newspapers, they are swayed and slanted according to their purposes. And I have to, because I love it here out of Colossians 2, 6 through 9. It's like, this whole thing is that, we're supposed to be established in the faith of the Lord as you've been taught, abounding with it in thanksgiving. But beware lest anyone cheat you through philosophy and empty deceit, according to the traditions of men, according to the basic principles of the world, and not according to Christ. Well, you know what? That's the extensibility of the gospel, because if we have God's principles, then we will have good governance, we will have virtue, we will have morality, and we will then take and have a people that understand justice and understand what it means from a national as well as a local governing body. So come on back next week when Sam Adams returns talking about those anti-federalists, because you know something? They did. They absolutely got it right.